The governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosello, is expected to resign following massive protests against his administration, according to local media. Demonstrations continued throughout the night, with protesters making it clear they wouldn't stop until the governor leaves office. Puerto Rico has been calling for Rosello's resignation for over a week after a leaked social media chat revealed his misogynistic and racist messages. He has already stepped down as leader of the new Progressive Party and is expected to be replaced by Justice Secretary Wanda Vázquez. The neoliberal party has pushed an agenda of privatization in Puerto Rico and is presently embroiled in a corruption scandal. In other news, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has arrived in Cuba for an official visit. Our correspondent Fabiola Lopez is in Havana with the details.
The Russian Minister Sergei Lavrov is on an official visit in Cuba as part of his Latin American tour, which includes Brazil and Suriname. In Brazil, he will attend a meeting of foreign ministers of the BRIC countries. But in Cuba, Lavrov is set to meet with his Cuban counterpart, Bruno Rodriguez, on Wednesday. Lavrov is also scheduled to meet with President Miguel Díaz-Canel to discuss bilateral relationships and other international and regional matters. The Russian foreign minister will also participate in the inauguration ceremony of the Statue of the Republic in the National Capitol building. The statue was recently restored with the help of Russian experts and is considered to be the world's third tallest statue inside a building. The visit showcases the strong bilateral relationship between Cuba and Russia, especially in light of latest sanctions the United States has imposed in Cuba.
That was Fabiola Lopez from Cuba. On Monday, Venezuela's power grid suffered a new attack that left a large part of the country without power. According to the government, an electromagnetic attack from an unknown source was the probable cause of this latest incident.
After the power went out in Venezuela at around 4 p.m. local time, contingency plans were put in place to prioritize citizens' needs. In Caracas, alternative transport was provided for everyone who usually relies on the metro.
This was a political sabotage, nothing else. They're trying to sabotage our government. They want to paralyze Venezuela, but they are not going to win. As Venezuelans, we are working people, and no matter what, we will move forward.
In the face of this latest attack, the authorities put into motion a new system to return power to the country as soon as possible. The system that was first developed after the previous round of attacks in the power grid back in May.
The Bolivarian government has implemented protection protocols, which allow us to confirm we are in the process of restoring power and hope to finish doing so in the shortest time possible. As such, we have activated contingency plans to provide transport and water for all citizens, as well as to provide all necessary aid to hospitals and health centers. We have also deployed security forces to guarantee the peace and safety of all citizens.
Power is being restored in stages across the country. As a precautionary measure, the government cancelled school and work on Tuesday. So far, this is the fourth electromagnetic attack against Venezuela's power grid. Back in March, Venezuela suffered a massive blackout as most of the country went dark for 11 days in a row. Following an investigation, the government provided proof that this had been a coordinated attack on the Guri hydroelectric plant.
The Chilean Association of Teachers has ended their national strike after 50 days. Association President Mario Aguilar says they decided to put an end to the strike after a consultation showed that over 67% of teachers wish to stop the strike and instead want the association to focus on developing an action plan. Chilean teachers were staging a strike for almost 2 months after the government of Sebastián Piñera refused to address their demands.
With the strike, we have hopefully taught a lesson to this arrogant elite that they must betray us with a different attitude. The government did want to have a dialogue with us, and only by the 4th week of the strike, they decide to sit down for talk with us. This is the explanation of why this strike lasted so long, because of the arrogance of the government. They did want to talk to us.
People in northern Peru have been on strike for 10 days against the construction of the Tía María mine. Our correspondent Jaime Herrera has the details from Lima.
Compañeros, en efecto, el día de hoy continúan las protestas.
Protests continue in the valley of Tambo in the Arequipa region. The strike against the construction of the Tía María mine has been going for 10 days now, and there is no end in sight. Local people, together with environmental organizations, say the planned mine will be devastating consequences in the environment and endanger the valley agriculture, which is the main source for income in the region. On Monday, police deployed tear gas and helicopter to repress the protest. Many protesters were injured in the clashes. However, the strike is going strong and many protesters remain in the street. Many social organizations have joined the anti-mining protest, which have concentrated in the capital of the department of Arequipa. Protests have been calling on President Martín Vizcarra to stop the mining project. And the Arequipa region is not the only one protesting against mining activities. People in the region of Puno have already been holding a strike for 7 days now in protest for the Auritani mining project, which has already damaged the region's water supply and natural resources.
Jaime Herrera from Peru. Coming up, Colombians demand justice as a paramilitary member who murdered social leaders returns to the country after serving a prison sentence in the U.S. Stay with us.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Guide your body. Tuesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Former Colombian paramilitary chief Carlos Mario Jiménez arrived in Colombia from the U.S., where he served an 11-year prison sentence for drug trafficking, forced disappearance, and gender violence, among other crimes. Meanwhile, the victims in Colombia demand justice for his acts.
This weekend, former paramilitary chief Carlos Mario Jiménez, alias Macaco, arrived in Colombia from the U.S., where he was serving an 11-year sentence for drug trafficking. Macaco led the central block of Bolivar and was responsible for crimes such as forced disappearance, displacement, gender violence, recruitment of minors, massacres, among others.
In real life, it was the strongest bloc. They were able to control almost 5 departments, hundreds of municipalities, and elected various senators. The military chief was Julian Bolívar, the economic commander was Macaco, and the political commander was a man named Ernesto Baez. And that bloc was one of the ones that least cooperated with judicial authorities.
Departments like Cauca and Antioquia are where most assassinations of social leaders have taken place, and this could continue thanks to the return of Macaco.
Some 8 or 9 months ago, a strong war started to take place in the zone where Macaco was strong. Today, Colombia is going through a civil war in a zone called El Bajo Cauca Antioqueño. Municipalities of Cáceres, Taraza, Caucasia, and the rumor was that it was all due to Macaco's return.
Macaco's victims have mixed feelings about his return, like for Nancy Galarraga, who lost 4 siblings the same day due to the actions of the paramilitary. They killed her siblings in the department of Putumayo in front of everybody, and no one did anything about it.
This has been very painful for me. Every time I do an interview, it's like bringing back all the memories of pain and sadness in my heart. All I want is justice for my family, that those people who caused my family so much pain, that they pay for what they did.
And although in this case, the bodies of the Galarragas were found and some paramilitaries received sentences, it is still not enough for the Galarragas sisters, and in many other cases. They feel that much more needs to be done to ensure justice for victims of paramilitaries.
For the indigenous San Marcelino in the Quechua community, where girls under 15 years old disappeared, ancestral authorities assaulted, and other cases like the disappearance of professors, campesinos, and farmers, the perpetrators have still not been brought to justice.
Carlos Mario Jimenez, Macaco, will have to respond for the crimes he committed to the Colombian justice system.
Now we head to Paraguay. Taxi drivers and police have clashed during a protest against ride-sharing mobile apps Uber and Move. Police used rubber bullets and water cannons to disperse protesters who blocked one of the main avenues in the capital, Asunción. Dozens of people were injured and at least 7 protesters were arrested, including the president of the Asunción Association of Taxi Drivers. Protesters fear the spread of the ride-sharing apps will lead to at least 1,500 taxi drivers losing their jobs. Honduran citizens have condemned extreme violence used by military and police forces during recent protests and demand the resignation of the security minister and the chief of police.
Police and military repression and their use of tear gas against the students who joined recent protests by the health and education sectors has left many suffering from anxiety.
They have already used university students as guinea pigs. We don't know what's going to happen to us. If anything, the government should be careful, because this time we are not alone.
The damage goes beyond the attacks with tear gas. Experts have shown how affected minors go through various stages of stress and anxiety, which can cause a physical impact.
Victims tend to relive the violent event over and over. They have nightmares, they suffer from insomnia, and develop eating disorders. They're constantly afraid that the event will happen again. Victims also suffer from mood swings, crankiness, and their performance in school decreases.
These students joined protests against the privatization of schools. Since then, police and military have been constantly sent to schools to repress them violently.
They throw tear gas bombs into schools, harming all students both physically and mentally. They throw tear gas bombs in the neighborhoods, inside homes, where there are also elderly and differently able people.
Health and education activists, along with organizations in defense of children, made a call to all international entities to bear witness to the aggressions against Honduran kids.
The U.S. Secretary General seems to be obsessed with what's happening in other countries, but ignores what's happening in places like Honduras or Haiti. They are killing our kids. This shows these organizations are complicit with certain governments like ours.
During recent protests, 2 minors were killed by security forces. One of them was taking part in the protest while the other, a 13-year-old girl, was the daughter of a human rights activist. On top of this, 9 university students received gunshot wounds.
Human rights groups in the U.S. are rejecting a proposal by the Trump administration to fast-track the deportation of migrants without allowing them to appear before a judge. The new regulation will apply to any person living in the U.S. without papers for less than 2 years. Migrant organizations say that up to 300,000 people could be targeted under the plan. The move has been condemned as a violation of rights and would rip apart thousands of families, devastating entire communities. And adding to the immigration discussion in the U.S., the Mexican government continues to comply with an agreement with the U.S. on curbing the flow of migration. On Monday, authorities provided a report on the advances made during these past weeks.
In 45 days, Mexico's government has reduced the number of migrants entering the country through its southern border by 36%. These migrants mostly come from Central American countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, with high hopes of seeking asylum in the United States.
The measures Mexico has taken were according to its own laws and policies, and they are proved to be effective. We have been able to address the issues of letting people passing through our territory, but only those who are doing so according to our policies.
President Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he will maintain the current migratory plan, which includes the deployment of the National Guard at several border points.
We believe the best is to keep the flow of migrants organized in a way that we can care for the migrants and respect their human rights. And we will do so little by little because it's not easy to solve the issues behind migration.
This report comes just a day after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited Mexico, and 45 days after the Mexican government signed a migration deal with the United States in order to avoid an initial 5% of U.S. tariffs on Mexican exports.
There was no discussion about the third safe country, which I insist is a proposal that was on the table, because in those days it was a very difficult situation, but we did not accept it.
The Mexican government's short-term plans for migration include investments for migration centres and also continuing with the development plans for Central American countries like Guatemala, El Salvador and Honduras.
Actually, this is not going to stop migration, but will simply change a little the number we have seen so far in terms of forced migration. And I'm not talking about the last few months, which is a more evident migration, but something that has been going on for at least 15 years.
Meanwhile, operations to stop human trafficking continue as well. Trucks filled with undocumented people are not uncommon on the road. And in these cases, Mexican authorities say that not only the drivers will be investigated, but also the owners of the vehicles used for human trafficking.
Still to come, protesters find a novel way to express their disapproval of the incoming UK Prime Minister. We'll show you how when we come back. Don't go away.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Protests against incoming British Prime Minister Boris Johnson have begun even before he officially takes the reins of the UK after winning the Conservative Party leadership. The anti-Brexit activist group led by donkeys projected an image of the incoming Prime Minister onto the Buckingham Palace facade, calling him a liar, ahead of his meeting with the Queen to formally put together a government. Johnson has come under fierce criticism for his egotism, racism and duplicity. Israeli forces are continuing to tear down houses considered too close to a segregation wall in the village of Surbaher. 16 residential buildings were targeted to the south of Arab Jerusalem, holding around 100 apartments. Israel proceeded with the demolition despite international criticism after the Israeli Supreme Court agreed with the military that the buildings pose a security risk. Palestinians argue that the move is part of Israeli colonial policy, which seeks to build more illegal settlements on Palestinian land. United Nations has said it laments the decision and has condemned the demolition of Palestinian homes by the Israeli government.
We as Member States of the European Union strongly condemn the demolition by Israel of Palestinian buildings in the district of Wadi al-Hummus in the southeast of Jerusalem. We remain seriously concerned by the continued demolition of Palestinian property by Israeli authorities. In all but the most exceptional circumstances, demolition in occupied territories is contrary to international humanitarian law and to UN Security Council resolutions. The practice causes unnecessary suffering to ordinary Palestinians, and it is harmful to the peace process. In this specific case, the demolitions were particularly egregious, as a number of the buildings were located in areas A and B under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority according to the Oslo agreements, and thus constitute a violation of those agreements. They set a dangerous precedent that directly jeopardizes the two-state solution. Thank you.
China has condemned the United States for trying to impose its own legal measures on Chinese businesses. The Foreign Ministry said the head of Dadong Hongxiang Limited is being investigated by the Chinese judiciary for economic crimes, but the U.S. imposed sanctions on the company in 2016.
First, China opposes the U.S. according to its domestic laws, enacting long-arm jurisdiction over Chinese entities and individuals. This position has been consistent along. Second, the head of Dadong Hongxiang Limited Company you mentioned is suspect of economic crimes, and China's judiciary is currently dealing with this matter according to its law. Third, I want to emphasize that China has always been committed to carry out its international duty on the UN Agreement on Non-Proliferation and Export Controls.
Hundreds of Sudanese university students rallied in Khartoum demanding justice for fellow students killed in the months of political unrest. As riot police were deployed in the area, students chanted, "Blood for blood, we don't want compensations," while holding photographs of students killed over the past 7 months. The rally follows wide discontent with a power-sharing deal signed last week between protest leaders and the military, as negotiations have yet to address accountability for those killed since December.
The martyrs of the Sudanese students who died, who gave their life for this country, and who were so adamant to see a change. Today, this demonstration, this process comes in their memory, and also to tell the authorities that we have missing persons, and they should be known their whereabouts. Where are they? And also this is the right of their families, to know their whereabouts.
Scores of people in Nigeria have attended the funeral of Shiite Muslim protesters who were killed by police during protests on Monday. 8 people, including a journalist and a police officer, were killed during clashes between security forces and members of the Islamic movement in Nigeria. They had taken to the streets to demand the release of their jail leader, Ibrahim Saksaki. Saksaki was detained alongside his wife in 2015 on charges of murder and attempted murder, but his supporters say the charges are a fabrication.
I feel very sad and at the same time very happy for the gift of martyrdom that was given to my son, Ali Ibrahim Suleiman. He's one of the 6 martyrs that were given funeral prayer just now. So I am feeling happy that I was given the gift of martyrdom. But I'm very sad that the Nigerian security, who were trained and paid to guard the citizens, they used the gun that was meant for the protection of the citizens to kill my son.
And the Committee to Protect Journalists has expressed sadness at the killing of a Nigerian journalist who was covering the Shiite protest on Monday. The organization has since appealed to the government to ensure that those responsible for the death of Precious Owolabi are held accountable. Owolabi, who worked for a local TV station, died after being shot in the stomach during the protests. A South African engineer has won the Royal Academy of Engineering Prize for designing a smart locker that automatically disperses medicine to patients with chronic illnesses. 31-year-old Neo Huthri came up with the concept of the smart locker known as the Pele box after he was diagnosed with tuberculosis and experienced the challenges of collecting medication from public hospitals. Instead of spending long hours in queues, patients using the Pele box receive a code on their phones and use the code to collect their medication from lockers placed in strategic locations.
I was trained to build solutions and product. The idea was to then say, can we build a product that is patient-centric, that speaks to us first as patients, while still adhering to all of the regulatory requirements and all of the framework that the Department of Health wants to exist to improve access to care.
Pillbox is okay, it's not stressful. For instance, when I get a message on my phone, I can go and fetch it the day after. Even if I have work to do, I can go get my medication. I don't need to wait in long queues at the clinic anymore, so I just come in, get my medication and leave. I'm happy about that.
And before we go, we want to share our joy with you. Today we celebrate 14 years of broadcasting, making international struggles visible and connecting the global south.
Con la voz de nacimos con una estrella a seguir.
Con el símbolo de la libertad en nuestros genes.
Con la voz de la rebeldía en la garganta.
Con la espada de la verdad en nuestras manos.
La que no hiere, pero vence en batalla.
Hemos crecido rompiendo paradigmas.
Yendo donde otros no quieren ir.
Donde a otros no conviene ir.
Hemos cruzado los Andes.
En una campaña admirable que nos ha llevado más allá de nuestra América.
A cruzar mares sorteando todo tipo de peligros.
Y nuestro norte ya no es solo el sur.
Nuestra bandera es la de los pueblos.
Los que resisten incólumes el regreso de viejos fantasmas.
Pero que no se resignan a otros 100 años de soledad.
Somos la niña bonita que creció libre. Y ahora es joven rebelde que abre caminos.
Que es ojos y boca, que es paso que avanza.
Somos Telesur, la señal informativa de América Latina.